Thank you, Ed, and thank you to everyone for being here tonight. I've been the managing editor of the Journal for about 6 years now, and taking on this particular topic has been among the most daunting things we've ever considered doing. And we have some members of the team here in the audience. You're going to meet them in a little bit to sort of talk about the stories that they wrote, but we have writers across the state who contribute from issue to issue and can go out and pretty much cover every corner of the state. And I think we're really the only publication around that has the capacity to do that. We also love telling the stories of Kansans, and so part of what we'll do later on is introduce some of the Kansans who are featured in this magazine and give them an opportunity to share some brief insights that might be helpful for you as you continue your conversations about this issue. So one of the things that makes this issue different for me as an editor is we're writing something not just to be read. We're writing something to be discussed. We're writing something to foster conversations that, quite frankly, really don't exist in a lot of places right now. And so I got to admit that, like, when our board of directors chose this issue and said, Chris, all right, go out and put an issue about it, I didn't really know how to do that because there's not really a model for figuring out how to create really great discussions on an issue like this. And so I decided to do, and we decided to do, what we always do when we're kind of stuck. We reached out to our alumni, to the graduates of our leadership program. I think we're close to 9,000 of those people. And so we made a survey, and it had all these different kinds of questions on it. Like, some of them were questions that you might expect, like, describe your views on this issue or describe what you'd like to see happen. And some of them were kind of weird, like describing how would you describe the person who sits on the opposing side of this issue from you? And so we got a really great response, got about 500 responses back, and it was like this treasure trove of data to help us understand, like, what it is we needed to do to make an issue that could be discussed and kind of get at the barriers. And from our alumni feedback, we were able to identify 5 barriers that we really think get in the way of a good conversation about guns and public safety. So the first thing that became really apparent from our survey data is that there's just a wide array of experiences in Kansas as it relates to guns. And among our alumni, it's really, really diverse. I think, like, we ask a question about people's experiences with guns, and I think something like 45% described things pretty positively. Another 30% were kind of negative or just a little unsure, and then or didn't really have a relationship. And then, like, the rest were kind of conflicted or didn't really have any opinion at all. And so on one hand, this is really great, like, to have a diverse array of experiences. That's what you need to have a really good conversation. But the problem with that is when you have that much diversity, it's really hard for people to understand each other. It's really hard for people to communicate about those things. And so when we designed our magazine, we wanted to keep in mind this barrier. And so we wanted to kind of embody this idea of asking people to talk about their experiences and why their beliefs are important to them first, before we talk about anything related to legislation or things like that, because those things tend to be things you can disagree with somebody on, but you can't disagree with someone's experiences. And once you know about those experiences, like, you sort of get like a view below the iceberg that wouldn't have seen before. And so we ask all of our writers, we went out and did stories, 14 stories across the state, and we really anchored our coverage in this edition on those 14 stories about experiences and why their beliefs are important to them and what they've gone through in relation to this issue. And we're not talking about legislation or interpretations of the Second Amendment as much, although those things get discussed. But we really want you to understand just the sheer breadth of different views and opinions that exist in the state and appreciate them. Another thing that we found from our alumni is there's a really high degree of certainty about how to solve this problem. When we ask our alumni how certain they were, the results that came back, that I think 62% said they were certain or very certain that their way, their preference, was the right response to this issue. And I mean, I think that's evidence of just the strong feelings that this particular issue inspires, but it's also a challenge, because at the Kansas Leadership Center, we talk about adaptive challenges. We talk about wrestling with things that are so tough that they really defy quick fixes. And so we have to engage with a lot of different kinds of people and learn from them and create new things in order to, address those challenges that just keep evolving over time. And so, but I think it's very human to be certain about these kinds of things and to want that certainty that your position is right. And I don't think it makes a lot of sense to try and force people to not be certain. So what I would urge you to do, and what we urged our writers to do in interviewing our sources for this story, is to focus on the areas where people are curious, where they don't know what the answers are, where they'd be willing to talk about something. So every writer that worked on this edition had a set of questions that included what's non-negotiable for you, to sort of establish what's not on the table, as well as what would you be willing to discuss. And so I think one of the things that emerges in the portraits in this particular issue is a lot of nuance and a wider frame of reference than maybe you get when we fight over legislation in stories in traditional media. One of the most eye-opening things for me in these survey responses was just how easy it is to kind of fall in the trap of describing the other side, however you define them, as in the most negative terms possible. So when our alumni are really open-minded people, and we teach them to hold and test multiple interpretations, and yet when they were asked to describe the other side, the words they used were extreme, adamant, stubborn, reactive. They want to take all the guns. They want to give guns to everybody and have them every place. And other ones were uninformed, closed-minded, ignorant. And it was really hard for people to be gracious. And I think it sort of speaks these are good people. These are people who, want to do the right things and want to connect with other people. But it just speaks to just how hard it is to, push ourselves to seeing, holding those and testing those multiple interpretations. So one of the things that we tried to do in this edition is to not fall into that trap and not try to describe people in ways that they couldn't agree with. So we would want, every source that we profiled in this magazine, they may quibble with us on certain things, but they would feel that, we're describing their views and their values in a way that they would be willing to accept. But I think this is something that requires a lot of practice. So in the design of the magazine, we've tried to set it up so that no matter which side you're on, you get a chance to spend some time being immersed in the viewpoints of other people. So we have 3 sections, and we took one section and we devoted it exclusively to the viewpoints of gun enthusiasts. And there are 4 or 5 stories in that section. And we took another section and devoted it exclusively to people working to reduce the toll of gun violence in our society. And so our encouragement is to spend the time in that section with the viewpoint that you most struggle to understand, that you most disagree with, versus gravitating to the people you already agree with, which is just sort of the temptation on social media. So we wanted to try and make it just a little bit easier to embody this thing that I think we all want to do it, but I just think it's really hard to have it be part of our practice. We also found in our survey data a bit of a reluctance of some people to really talk or want to engage in this issue because it's really tough. It can be conflictual. The people who have the strongest opinions can really dominate things. And if I'm not really sure what I want, how do I get involved in talking about this? What's in it for me? So one of the metaphors that's been really moving for me in thinking about how we create the space to have a dialogue that, like this is the idea of a moment of truce. Has anybody here heard of the Christmas truce of 1914? Going way back in history. Yeah, so it was during World War I, and the war was in its early years, and the British and Germans were fighting on the front lines in Belgium. They were in their trenches. They were battling. And then all of a sudden, Christmas Day came around and the fighting stopped. And for this one day, like people, they came out of their trenches. They retrieved their comrades in arms who'd been killed in the fighting because they hadn't been able to get there because of all the shooting. And they exchanged Christmas gifts. They sang Christmas carols. And they even played soccer. And I mean, on one hand, it's like kind of silly to be really inspired by this story because World War I, like the real story of World War I, is it's this massive, toll of death and destruction, the likes of which humankind had never seen before. And I'm really excited about this one little day that happened that didn't really last. But what I love about that example is like those soldiers had every reason not to do that. Their loyalties, their obligations, their loyalty to their country, the need to fight, to do their jobs, and yet they still, like, for one day, found the need to connect with the other side. And I find that, like, inspiring because, I look at where I live, like we have lots of conflict in our society, we have lots of debate and dialogue, a lot of people don't like each other, but the levels of conflict that occur are nothing, compared to this. And so what's my excuse for not being willing to at least like declare a truce for one night, like tonight, or during one of these journal talks? And so when you look at the cover of the magazine, Ceasefire, and getting beyond our triggers, like that's what that's supposed to encourage people to do, is to step out and just be a little different and be willing to have some dialogues that we wouldn't normally have, knowing that it probably isn't going to last forever. Like we're all probably going to go back to our corners. We all have our values and beliefs, but that maybe in that space that's just a little bit different, that something might happen that might deepen our human connection with each other or create conditions that might lead to greater things in the future. Probably the most important question to me that we asked on this survey was, what advice do you have for the journal and journal talks in dealing with this issue? And people spoke pretty loud and clear. Like they said, don't be one-sided. Tell multiple sides. We want to hear from lots of different factions, lots of different perspectives. Seek out the facts. Avoid bias. And when I read all of this feedback, it was like, yeah, that's great. That's great. We totally want to do that. And then it hit me like, oh man, that's really hard. And it's especially hard because so many of the people who were filling out the survey, like they were asking things of us that were really hard for them to do, which I think is reasonable. Like we've tried to do our best with this edition, and we hope that we have touched as many factions as we possibly could and helped elevate those views and values and make it possible to discuss those things more. And it's entirely possible that there were some things we didn't catch or some things that we didn't do as well as we should. And I can guarantee you that if you read this magazine, if you really spend a lot of time with it, it's 96 pages. I think there are more than 20,000 words. So someone told me they had read it cover to cover already, and I was shocked. But I hope you read it cover to cover. But if you do, you're going to have the experience of something in here that's going to make you mad. It's going to piss you off, and you're going to have a choice to make. And I think that choice is, do you react to that? Do you get angry? Do you throw it down? Or do you try to create some space between that stimulus and how you respond to that and try to reflect on, well, why do I have these feelings? Why does this make me so angry? Why is this driving me in this particular direction? So I hope that our desire to try and be as unbiased as we possibly could will sort of be like a good faith effort for you to try and do the same, at least in this space when you're engaging with this magazine and engaging in these journal talks discussions. So those are the 5 barriers. I want to take a few minutes to talk to some of our writers and sources, the people who really bring the magazine to life. And this will sort of be a way to get a little bit of a sneak preview of what's in that magazine if you haven't quite read it cover to cover yet. So Monica Springer, where are you at?
Right here. Right here.
Okay. So we'll get you a microphone. So Monica is one of our writers from Dodge City, and so she had the opportunity to do a story that actually we found out from our alumni. Sean Rojas, our director of civic engagement, who you'll meet later, was actually doing conversations around the state, focus groups that used some of our survey questions and some of his own resources, and had a conversation in Garden City where we learned about this story about immigrants who are gun enthusiasts. And what I loved about this story was it wasn't stuff I'd thought about before or heard about before. So Monica, can you tell me a little bit about what you heard from immigrants like Gerardo Garcia?
Sure. So I spoke to a group of 5 or 6 gentlemen. They had all been in the U.S. for 20, 30, 35 years. And they are all members of the NRA. They hunt together. They work together. They go to the shooting range after work to shoot together. And it was really interesting. The first thing they told me when I sat down to interview them was that when they were growing up in Mexico 20, 30, 35 years ago, guns are illegal. If law enforcement caught you with a gun, the gun would be confiscated and you would be put in jail. And that was kind of what their thinking was. I mean, they know they're American citizens now. They know that it's legal to carry. But at the time I talked to them, none of them felt comfortable carrying in public. They put the guns in the vehicle either to go to the shooting range or hunting, but that was it. Like the quote on the board there, they thought that if they saw someone carrying a gun, if 5 or 6 guys saw each other carrying a gun, they thought that maybe egos would be involved, and they seemed to be against that, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that story brought out for me is how we have a Second Amendment, but not everybody has the same feeling about how they should exercise it or if they even can. Another person who the Second Amendment is really important to is who is an instructor and an educator at Fort Hays State University. And so she couldn't be with us tonight, but she has a huge value of guns and rural culture, and she sees that sort of eroding away, and concerns as the shift of the population to urban areas makes sort of erodes that fabric of rural culture that has been so important to her life. So we don't just have gun rights advocates, we also have people who are working to reduce the toll of gun violence. And so Joella Hoye from Lenexa is a chapter leader of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense, and she joins us tonight. And you can learn a lot from the issue, the story and the issue about the things that she's been doing, which are really interesting. But I'm curious, Joella, about how you got into this. Of all the things you could do, what made you want to get involved in activism on this issue?
Back in November of 2015, I think I'll stand so I can see you all. I was sitting on the couch after my son was in bed. He was a toddler back then. And I was looking through social media, and I listened to a 911 call that had come through from a woman in Colorado Springs. She called one time to say that there was a man in the street carrying a handgun and a rifle and a gas can, and it seemed suspicious. And it was not flagged as a priority call, and so the police didn't respond. There's open carry in Colorado. And then a few minutes later, she called back, and a man had been shot and was lying dead in the street. He shot 2 more people and killed them before he had a shootout with police. And in that moment, I realized that we've gone too far away from common sense on this issue. And I was a stay-at-home mom at the time. I did my master's degree at the University of Kansas in public administration. Before I became a stay-at-home mom, I was working in Johnson County Manager's office, and I felt like my experience in public administration and the fact that I'm a gun owner made me a good fit to engage with lawmakers, engage with other people in our community, in our state, in our country who care about this issue. And so I joined Moms Demand Action that night. And this woman right here, Leanna Barkley, she was really getting the chapter going here in Kansas. We found each other. She had already had some things going on, and we've really grown across the state and across the country. We have a chapter in all 50 states. And I really feel like where I come from on this is we all want to keep our families safe. We all do. And we have a proud tradition of hunting and gun ownership in this state. And we also have opportunities to pass sensible gun laws that save lives. While I was working at Johnson County government, I sat there and listened when we had an update from our lobbyists saying that the Kansas legislature was going to end permits and training to be able to carry a concealed loaded gun. We don't have background checks on all gun sales, and the state also forced public, state, and municipal entities to have to allow guns in their buildings. And so I feel like there are sensible approaches to this, and we could really be a model for the nation, for the country, and what it's like to have that pride in the Second Amendment and also common sense.
Thank you. So just like content aside, like one of the things that struck me when I read that story was like, what's the tipping point for all of us to get involved, to do something that we care about, whether it's on guns or either side of this issue? Like, I'm just sort of curious about that. Like, some people had never reached that, and that happened to be your moment that has led you into all of these deeper things. So one of the things that we heard from gun owners was that people can talk about the biases in the media, but one of the things that doesn't get covered very well are gun owners doing good things, or gun owners using guns appropriately, legally, safely. And I mean, you can kind of make sense on one level, because it's not news when people do what they're supposed to do. It's only news when when they do things they're not supposed to do. So we had a writer, David Zumbaugh, and I believe David's here with us tonight. David? Yeah. So David and I haven't met, but we've communicated by phone and email. So David, you interviewed two people, Derrick Mein of Paola, who's a world champion clay target shooter, and you also interviewed Barry Sullivan, who's a lifelong hunter. Is there a way that you could summarize, like, what do you think we should know about what they bring to the debate or to this issue? What do they help us understand about guns and public safety?
Let me figure out how to work this chair.
We make it hard for you to get up here.
You know, I'm a freelance guy, and I'm over 400 published articles, and I have some projects come my way, and all the opinion piece, I look at really three things. Do I want to do this project or not? One is, I have the knowledge and background, have a valid opinion. The second is, what forum are you going to have that opinion? Is it going to be at the corner cafe or the saloon? And third, is it any of my business? And you can take that for discussions on a lot of different topics. For me, I'm pretty much like both these guys. I grew up in that culture, so I could express those views and values for this magazine. Derrick, I've known him for quite a while. He travels the world for representing. He's made the U.S. national shooting team, and he'll probably go to the Olympics in 2020. Kansas farm boy made good. And he has hurdles from some of the states that he travels to for packing his own shotguns and ammunition and so forth. So this discussion is valid for that, and I am pleased and honored to participate in this magazine. And I will tell you, I think this is one of the best treatises on the topic that I've ever seen, let alone participate in. The other one is a friend of mine I've known for a long time, and we're kind of the same mind. You get to know someone when you sit in the duck blind with them or wade in a trout stream and make all the mistakes and take long walks behind short-tailed dogs. So once again, and really in that vein, doesn't have anything to do with firearms. It has to do with the experience and where you are. So I hope that sheds a little light on those topics.
Thank you so much. So one of the perspectives that I thought I really was really eager to hear was a perspective of gun store owners and sort of like what they experience. And so we had several of them, including Ryan Ballard, and I believe Ryan's here. You can just wave and say hello. I really appreciated Ryan's quote here. We're always told not to judge other people by the actions of a few. We in the gun community feel that we don't get the same treatment. And so I've been sitting with that one for a while and thinking about putting together this issue. One of the flashpoints around this issue since the Parkland shootings just over a year ago has been school safety. And we have some variety of perspectives in the magazine related, relevant to school safety. One of them is Tim Morse, who has actually created a proposal to arm well-trained staff members to go into the schools in his counties and provide protection from incidents. And so it's generated a lot of discussion, including his own dialogue with superintendents in his county, but it hasn't quite led to a lot of resolution yet. So it was interesting to see him bring up that issue and what the response was. We have a different perspective on school safety reflected in the comments of Steve Noble. And so Steve is here with us tonight. And Steve, I was hoping, one of the things I appreciated, I read a comment about how you saw school safety at it was either a State Board of Education meeting or a legislative budget that was sort of like broader than how I thought about it. So I was hoping you could quickly tell me, what do you think it means to have a safe school in this day and age?
Well, I did have the opportunity last summer to speak to a joint committee at the State House on school safety. We received some additional funding in our school district, and they wanted to know how we've used that. Most of that funding went to putting more technical approaches in place to make our facilities safer, like security cameras, security entrances into our buildings, and other types of equipment and trainings that would go into our staff. It could not go into salaries for security officers. It couldn't go to purchasing guns, that sort of thing. And so I testified on the things that we had done. We specifically have secure entrances now, vestibules that are locked and secured, where everybody has to be buzzed into an office area where they're detained until they're explained why they're there, and our secretaries and folks can get a look at them, and then they're allowed into the building with a badge and a purpose, where they're going and what their purpose is there. And then we added security cameras both inside and outside all of our facilities, and all those are good and well. We also have a highly trained security team that consists all of licensed police officers, former police officers, and county sheriff's officers. And they staff throughout our district of 4,000 kids, around 700 staff in the North Topeka area. But what we, I think, really needed to touch on in that conversation was the deeper issues of school safety. And that is, we're seeing a lot of social and emotional challenges with our kids and our families, and mental health issues that I think are being sort of a little bit overlooked in this debate. And so there is some efforts to improve those areas in our schools, and we've added social and emotional curricula to our programming, and we're addressing mental health, the challenges that we're seeing, but we've somehow got to find a way to connect with our kids and connect with our families and each other around the issue of respecting oneself and others, and being a little more tolerant and patient with our differences. And so connecting with our kids and being there for one another, I think, is critical as we approach this in our schools.
So one of the things that this last year has surfaced is more people sort of taking some risky actions related to addressing this issue. So one of the people that we interviewed was Tim DeWeese, of the Johnson County Mental Health Director, who's launched an initiative to, of all things, distribute gun locks. And Tim couldn't be with us tonight, but Dawn Novascone, who's a writer for the magazine. Where did you go, Dawn? Right there. She wrote the story about Tim, and I'm curious, like, this seems like kind of a sticky situation to try and work in if you're a public official, and then you're also like doing something like making gun locks available to the community. So how did you see in your reporting Tim DeWeese managing the politics of doing something like this?
So that's one of the things I asked him, because I thought it seemed risky on his part to even step into this, because neither, you can see if there's two sides to this debate, you can see neither one liking this potentially. But he said he looked at it as though he was offering gun locks to help save people's lives, especially children. The rate of suicide in Johnson County increased in the first few months of last year, or I'm sorry, it doubled in the first few months of last year, the rate of suicide among teenage children. And that was so striking to so many people. So he said when somebody talks to him about it, or if somebody gets worried about it, upset in some way, he says, to take the political fray out of it, I'm tired of young people dying. And no sane human questioned anything, he said after that. It just came down to mental health and him doing his job on a very different level than most mental health directors have done it. But that's how he explained it to me, and I thought that was really interesting. He said what gets us to the middle is nobody wants young people dying.
And so that's a good segue to our next speaker. So one of the things that has emerged in the last year is the activism of young people being a force in politics after the Parkland shootings. Nathan Dominguez, who's a student at Newton High School, joins us tonight, and eventually we'll get him a microphone. He's right over here. So Nathan, I'm interested. So we have pictures of the magazine. I think you're even speaking in one of the big rally with all the signs and like all of the really strong political feelings that relate to this issue. And like you expect your group organizing something that expressed something really profound. But what I found interesting was your comment in the magazine about how you see the separation between red and blue in this country not being as big as it sometimes seems. So I was hoping you could tell me, like, what makes you think that, or what have you seen or experienced that gives you the sense that there's more common ground on this issue than maybe we think?
Right. Well, during this last election cycle, it was the first one that I actually got to volunteer in, and a part of that was it was the first time my parents let me drive anywhere further than the corner of my street. But through that advocacy and the activism and volunteering for various candidates through canvassing, phone banking, and even through the march, I got to meet a whole host of people. And they came from all different walks of life. And with that came different viewpoints. That was to be expected. And the great thing was that once you took the opportunity to sit down and have a deep conversation about the hard topics with them, you started to see and understand that the separation between us and them isn't as big as you would have previously expected. I believe a study in 2018 found that about 92% of people agree for universal background checks, and that about 86% of people agree for red flag laws that would temporarily or permanently confiscate weapons from at-risk individuals, and that 70% of people agree in raising the minimum age to purchase a firearm to the age of 21. And that it was those sort of things. And when I spoke to these people, I'm proud to say that I never left a conversation without having one common thing between us and one thing that we would agree on. And it was meeting the people and understanding where they came from and being able to reach a point of agreement in every conversation that really instilled the belief in me that what the media portrays as being this very divisive issue isn't really as divisive as we would believe.
So in addition to students, another voice that's been more active in the last year is that of healthcare professionals. And so the magazine profiles Robert Winfield, who's a trauma surgeon at the University of Kansas Health System. Now, Robert couldn't be with us tonight because he's working, but one of the things that does emerge in the story is that having a gunshot victim is a regular occurrence at the University of Kansas Hospital. In fact, it's like a weekly occurrence, happening a couple times a week. And so he speaks about the challenges of talking to families and and the experience of giving people second chances at life through his work. I talked to you about the 2 sections that we had. We also had a 3rd section in this magazine where we looked at the consequences of guns, both the lives guns take and the lives that guns save. So we profiled the Crowell family in Rush Center who lost their son to suicide. We profiled Merdice Sims of Kansas City who lost her son to a gun homicide in which the person was acquitted, and so no one has ever been held accountable. And so it's really easy, there are people who keep really great statistics about the number of lives that are taken through gun violence, but there's not a lot of statistics that show how many lives are saved. That's a much harder number to get a bead on, and researchers argue about that all the time. But we knew we had a story in Kansas where that happened, and so in a Lenexa Costco, Captain Michael Howell, encountered an armed individual there and took action that you may have seen on the news. And so Captain Howell joins with us tonight and was gracious enough to share his story with our writer David Frese, who is also here. And so Captain Howell, I was just curious, what do you hope people learn from your story, or what should we take away from that situation that you experienced where you had to do something that, I don't know, maybe not a lot of us imagined that we could do?
The bottom line is, regardless of your belief on whether someone should be armed or not armed, guns in the right hands of the right people at the right time save lives. In fact, to extrapolate on that a minute, there were over 1,100 shoppers at Costco that day. I don't know if you happen to be one of them or not.
No, I was just down the street though.
I went there at 11:03, and within a minute and a half of me arriving and loading up my item that I went to purchase, it all broke loose. I don't know if you've seen, I'm sure many of you have seen the video from the news story. What you see on the TV screen was only 1/3 or maybe 1/4 of the actual store. There were about 125 people that you saw rushing for the exit as the gunman chased from the entrance to the back door. There were another almost 800 that ran by me, and I thought there was a big sale on aisle 3 or something. I just did not. It's just Johnson County. Nothing ever happens in Johnson County. And I had to physically grab a guy and step in front of him and say, "Look, I'm a police officer. What is going on?" And he said, "There's a guy up front. So he's an off-duty U.S. Marshal. He's there to kill people." That was his intent, not only to terrorize the community, but to execute as many people as he could. And I didn't let that happen. I followed him as tactic. I wasn't all cool and tactical. I had a really bad torn meniscus in my right knee. I didn't know at the time. But nevertheless, I followed him to the back of the store. And I'm one of our CIT trainers for the KCK Police Department. I truly believe we have a mental health crisis in America. And while, yeah, I'm a cop, I was prepared to do what had to be done. That trainer part in me wanted to give him every chance I could to give up. Because I knew this person was probably more than likely mentally ill. And come to find out he was. He was a paranoid schizophrenic who felt that he had violated the firefighter's creed, and there's not one. He used to be a firefighter in Colorado, and that people were out to execute him because of his violating that creed. So I don't know why he did what he did that day, but talking about gun control or carrying guns, there was an FBI agent that met him at the front door that didn't have his gun that day. He had his ID, he had his badge, but he did not have his gun. Had he been prepared, like I was, I wouldn't be here today because I wouldn't have been involved. But he didn't. The gentleman chased everyone through the store, chased them out of the store, chased them as fast as he could, and I got around behind him. And again, that CIT instructor part of me wanted to give him a chance to give up. I said, police, drop the gun, don't move, hoping and praying that he was going to just put the gun down and we'd have a talk. You know, I'd handcuff him and we would go on. But instead he turned and pointed his gun at me. And I ended the threat. I didn't realize it until after I was given the investigative file from the Johnson County shooting team and the Johnson County District Attorney, and was able to see the video myself. There were kids being yanked out of their shoes and coats and drugged by their moms and dads, and elderly people falling down and trying to get to the door because this guy was, hell-bent on trying to kill them. So, I mean, it's sad that I had to kill somebody, but I rejoice in the fact, honestly, that I know there's over 1,200 people right now that were able to have a good Christmas that year. They didn't have to have funerals instead of a Christmas. They were able to teach their kids lessons about the pros and cons of gun ownership and what's good about being a responsible gun owner. Because there was a couple that was there that were licensed to carry. They had their concealed carry permits with them, but they chose not to engage because they knew their priority was their children. They had 2 small boys. And they also weren't confident. They were confident in their ability to defend themselves and one another, but not the public. I was glad I was there and handle it as quickly as I did, because I don't know if I would have been able to deal with the mental problems I would have faced had I not won.
Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. So David Frese, writer from Tonganoxie, is the writer we sent to interview Captain Howell. And so David, you not only learned about Captain Howell's story, you took a look at this good guy with a gun concept maybe a little more broadly. And so what were you thinking about when you finished this story about this idea of a good guy with a gun? David's right here.
Thanks. After I finished the story, I was glad that Captain Howell was there. I used to be a hunter, and the reason I say I used to be a hunter is because I'm terrible at it. And you see in the news, you see people who are out jogging with their sidearm, and they shoot themselves in the foot, or they go to a movie theater and they adjust themselves in the seat and they shoot themselves in the foot. I'm kind of the guy who probably would shoot himself in the foot. But I talked to Captain Howell around Christmas, and that hour and a half I spent with him was just a gift. And I know it was not an easy thing for him to do or talk about, but he has a lifetime of training, to the point that he even directed the gunman to a place where there was a wall behind him, so in case he missed, he would hit the wall and he wouldn't accidentally hit somebody else. And that's the kind of training that it'd be great if everybody had. I guess my point is that I left that interview, finished that story thinking, if we could have more training for more people, I think that those who are afraid of people with guns on the streets would have more security inside. It's kind of like the line in the Big Lebowski movie. I'm glad that Captain Howell's out there for the rest of us. But I thought your story was just incredible, and I know that I've talked to other people who feel the same and are very thankful that you were there that day.
Thank you, David. So Let's, why don't we give our sources that spoke a round of applause for coming and joining us tonight firsthand. And also the writers and editors of the journal, the ones who spoke as well as the ones who couldn't be with us tonight. And I want to mention someone specific. Bruce Jansen couldn't be here with us tonight. He is the copy editor for the journal, reads and puts everything that goes into the magazine through a fine-tooth comb. He took on a special role this issue, so my wife had a baby in October, and so for much of the time that this edition was developed, I was on leave, and so Bruce stepped into the role of senior editor and oversaw this project through some pretty crucial points in order to make it possible to bring it to you today. Bruce is a veteran editor who's worked at the Larned, Tiller, and Toiler, the Wichita Eagle, and the Kansas City Star, and he's also an avid hunter with lots of familiarity with guns, and so he brought like a really special set of knowledge. So if you could just give a round of applause to Bruce and everyone else who worked on the journal.